It started small, like a nagging itch in the back of my mind. Jenna, my wife of 7 years, had always been a whirlwind of energy, bustling with plans and ambitions. She was the type of woman who could light up any room, and for years, I basked in that glow. But lately, things felt different. Her laughter seemed forced, her once bright eyes now dimmer when they looked at me. She worked as a project manager in a high-pressure industry, a career that demanded late nights and endless networking events. I'd always been supportive, even when it meant quiet dinners alone or weekends spent waiting for her to finish one last email. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? We had built a life together, shared dreams, and talked of growing old side by side. But trust isn't invincible. It was a cold Monday night when the cracks first showed. I was sifting through laundry, distracted by a podcast playing in the background, when a text lit up her phone. The screen, carelessly left on the bed, displayed a message from Dad. Except my father-in-law never texted Jenna. He didn't even own a smartphone. I told myself it was probably a mislabeling error. Everyone makes mistakes, right? Yet, as I folded her clothes, my hands trembled. That was the night I began to notice everything. How she'd turn her phone away when I walked into the room. How her business trips now had an urgency that seemed manufactured. How her smiles, once so freely given, felt rationed and reserved. It was a subtle unraveling, a slow decay that ate away at the edges of my sanity. I decided not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was planning a surprise, or maybe work had gotten to her. After all, marriages go through rough patches. So I stayed quiet, pretending not to notice the late-night calls she took outside or the way she avoided my touch. Deep down, I was scared. Scared that if I pushed too hard, the truth would come tumbling out and destroy the fragile balance we had left. But the truth has a way of finding you, no matter how deep you bury your head in the sand. And so, I began my quiet investigation, not yet ready to confront her, but unable to ignore the growing chasm between us. Little did I know, the journey I was embarking on would uncover not just betrayal, but a twist so cruel and unimaginable, it would forever change the course of our lives. The next few weeks were a dance of half-truths and stolen glances. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, but the signs were piling up. Jenna's business trips were happening more frequently. The suitcases she once packed with care were now hastily thrown together, and her usual warm goodbyes felt like scripted performances. I couldn't shake the memory of that text from Dad. Every time I thought about it, a tightness gripped my chest. I had tried to dismiss it, even joked with myself that maybe her actual father had decided to join the 21st century after all. But the doubt lingered. Late one night, as Jenna slept soundly beside me, I picked up her phone, my heart pounding like a drum. Her lock screen lit up, displaying a gallery of photos we'd taken together on a weekend hike months ago. I hesitated, staring at her sleeping face. Was I about to become the person who invades their partner's privacy? Was this paranoia? Or was my gut screaming at me to uncover something I already knew? My fingers hovered over her passcode, her birthday. It was worth a shot. My pulse quickened when the phone unlocked. I scrolled through her recent messages, finding the usual exchanges with colleagues, her best friend, and family. Nothing seemed amiss until I came across a conversation under the name Dad. My stomach dropped as I read the messages. They weren't explicit, but they were far from casual. Dad, did you book the room for this weekend? Jenna, of course. Same place as last time. Can't wait to see you. I stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears welled in my eyes. It was like a punch to the gut. This wasn't my father-in-law. This was someone else. Someone she was planning clandestine weekends with. I wanted to wake her up right then and demand answers, but something held me back. A mix of fear, anger, and heartbreak churned inside me, and I realized I wasn't ready to face the truth. Not yet. The following day, I decided to take action. I installed a GPS tracker on her car and purchased a small recording device. It felt wrong, deceptive, but I couldn't sit idly by while my world unraveled. I needed proof. That weekend, Jenna left for another business trip. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips brushing my skin like a phantom touch. "I'll miss you," she said with a forced smile, her suitcase in hand. I watched her drive away, my heart heavy with dread. Later that evening, I checked the GPS tracker. It confirmed my worst fear. Jenna hadn't gone to a conference or a meeting. She was at a secluded hotel an hour away. Armed with the location, I drove there, parking discreetly down the street. Through the window of the lobby, I saw her standing near the check-in desk, smiling up at a man who was older, with a familiar build. My jaw clenched as the man turned slightly, and my worst fear took on a grotesque new shape. It was my father. The room spun as nausea hit me like a tidal wave. My knees threatened to buckle, but I forced myself to stay upright, watching as the man who had raised me wrapped his arm around my wife and led her toward the elevators. I sat in my car, staring blankly into the night. Betrayal didn't even begin to describe what I felt. My wife, my father, two people I loved, trusted, and depended on had shattered my world in the cruelest way possible. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. How long had this been going on? How could they betray me like this? But one thought rose above the others. I couldn't let this slide. The next morning, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, my face pale and haggard. There was a storm brewing inside me, a mix of pain and fury that threatened to consume me. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. The morning after witnessing the unspeakable, I found myself paralyzed by disbelief. My father, Jenna, together. It defied logic, shattering the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my life. I spent the day in a fog, unable to focus on anything but the image of them laughing together, walking hand in hand toward that elevator. Every glance at my phone tempted me to confront Jenna. Every time I saw a family photo, I wanted to call my father and scream until my throat gave out. But something stopped me. My anger hadn't yet found a direction. The betrayal was too overwhelming to react without a plan. The next few days passed in eerie normalcy. Jenna returned from her business trip the following evening, her face glowing with the afterglow of her secret rendezvous. She kissed me on the cheek, the same lips that had whispered who knows what to my father just hours before. "How was the trip?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. She smiled. "Exhausting but productive. The clients were impressed, though, so it was worth it." The ease with which she lied was breathtaking. I nodded, careful not to give away my thoughts. If she could wear a mask, so could I. That night, as she unpacked her suitcase, I noticed something odd. A faint scent of cologne lingered on her clothes. Not mine. Not hers. His. My stomach churned, but I said nothing, choosing instead to play my part as the oblivious husband. I needed leverage, a way to level the playing field. If they had betrayed me, then I would betray their trust too. My father, of all people, had broken the sanctity of family. The very thought sent waves of anger coursing through me. The opportunity presented itself a few days later. Jenna's mother, Linda, called to invite us to dinner. A casual family gathering, just her, Jenna, and me. Normally, I'd politely decline, but this time I saw an opening. Linda had always been kind to me, and over the years, she had become like a second mother. But more importantly, she had a strained relationship with Jenna. While their disagreements were minor, it was clear they didn't share the same deep bond one assumed most mothers and daughters did. Dinner that evening was pleasant enough, though tension lingered beneath the surface. Linda asked about Jenna's frequent trips, raising an eyebrow when Jenna deflected with a vague response about work. I watched them carefully, noting the subtle ways Linda's curiosity turned to suspicion. When Jenna excused herself to take a call, Linda leaned forward, her voice low. "She's been distant lately," she said, swirling her wine glass. "I've noticed. Is everything okay between you two?" It was the perfect opening. I didn't need to lie, just plant seeds. "She's been traveling a lot for work," I replied, feigning a casual tone. "It's been hard, but I try not to pry." Linda frowned, clearly unsatisfied. "Work, huh?" Jenna returned before we could say more, but the look on Linda's face told me she wasn't going to let the matter drop. Over the next few weeks, I found myself texting Linda more often. Innocent conversations at first, questions about recipes, updates on Jenna's health, but slowly, they grew more personal. She confided in me about her loneliness, her frustrations with Jenna, and her struggles to find fulfillment after retiring. At some point, our messages took a turn. The warmth in her words began to shift into something more. Compliments became flirtations, and I found myself leaning into it, testing the boundaries. Was I crossing a line? Absolutely. But in my mind, the betrayal I was orchestrating paled in comparison to theirs. It didn't take long for us to act on it. One evening, when Jenna was working late, I stopped by Linda's house to drop off some mail she had left at our place. She invited me in for a drink, and the rest unfolded as if it were preordained. Her touch was both tender and electric, a stark contrast to the cold indifference I'd felt from Jenna for months. We didn't talk about what we were doing. It felt too taboo to acknowledge. But in those stolen moments, I felt powerful, in control. The guilt didn't hit until later that night, as I drove home. I had betrayed Jenna, just as she had betrayed me. But the sting of remorse was dulled by the memory of her betrayal with my father. Two wrongs didn't make a right, but it didn't matter anymore. The rules of our marriage were already broken. By the time I got home, Jenna was fast asleep, her phone buzzing with another text from Dad. I stared at the screen for a long moment before slipping it into my pocket. I wasn't done yet. This wasn't over. If they thought they could break me, they had underestimated just how far I was willing to go. The days following my encounter with Linda were a chaotic blur of emotions. Guilt, anger, and exhilaration swirled in equal measure. I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt. Jenna had ripped our vows apart first. This was justice, wasn't it? Or was it just me grasping at anything to dull the pain? Jenna continued her facade, playing the dutiful wife while sneaking out for meetings and work dinners. Each time she left, I felt less of the gut-wrenching pain I once had. Instead, it was replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. I wasn't going to let her keep walking all over me. Meanwhile, my relationship with Linda deepened. What began as stolen kisses soon turned into something more. The guilt that had briefly plagued me began to fade as Linda's warmth replaced Jenna's icy distance. She was kind in a way Jenna hadn't been for months. Her laughter felt real, her touch grounding. One night, over wine and a dimly lit dinner at her place, Linda looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and worry. "What's going on, really?" she asked. "Between you and Jenna? And why are you here with me?" I hesitated, swirling the wine in my glass as I weighed my response. Telling Linda the truth felt dangerous, but lying to her now seemed pointless. "She's been unfaithful," I admitted, my voice heavy with bitterness. Linda's eyes widened, and her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. "With my father," I added. Her reaction was immediate: shock, disgust, and something else I couldn't quite place. "Your father," she repeated, as if saying it aloud would make it less real. "How long?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Long enough that I can't look at either of them without feeling like I'm losing my mind." She reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks: comfort. But the conversation didn't end there. Linda, it turned out, had her own suspicions about Jenna. She had noticed changes in her daughter over the past year. The secrecy, the distance. She hadn't been able to put her finger on it, but now everything made sense. "I can't believe she'd do this to you," Linda said, shaking her head. "And with your own father, no less." Her outrage mirrored my own, and as we sat there, conspirators in our shared betrayal, an idea began to form in my mind. "I don't want to let them get away with this," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Linda nodded, her expression hardening. "Neither do I." Over the next few days, we hatched a plan. It wasn't enough to confront them. I wanted them to feel the humiliation and pain they'd inflicted on me. Linda, surprisingly, was all in. Maybe it was her own anger toward Jenna bubbling to the surface, or maybe it was the thrill of being part of something bigger than herself. Either way, she was ready to help me exact my revenge. The first step was gathering evidence. I needed undeniable proof of Jenna's affair with my father. The GPS tracker and recording device had already given me a head start, but I needed more. Linda offered to help, volunteering to ask subtle questions during her conversations with Jenna. She tells me things she doesn't tell anyone else, Linda explained. If I push the right buttons, I might be able to get her to slip up. It was risky, but I agreed. Meanwhile, I continued to dig through Jenna's phone whenever she left it unattended. Her texts to my father were damning, filled with flirtations and promises that made my stomach churn. The more I read, the more determined I became to make them pay. But as the plan began to take shape, something unexpected happened. Jenna started to suspect something. One evening, as we sat on opposite ends of the couch, she glanced at me with narrowed eyes. "You've been acting strange lately," she said, her tone accusatory. I forced a laugh. "Me? You're the one who's always traveling." Her expression didn't soften. "I mean it, though. You're distant. Like you're hiding something." The irony of her words nearly made me laugh. Instead, I shrugged. "Maybe I'm just tired of being ignored," I said, letting a hint of bitterness creep into my voice. She blinked, caught off guard, but didn't press the issue. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized how close I was to losing control. Jenna wasn't as oblivious as I'd hoped. If I wasn't careful, she'd discover my plans before I could execute them. But I wasn't about to back down. Not now. I was playing a dangerous game, but the stakes were too high to quit. If Jenna and my father thought they could destroy me without consequences, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The plan was delicate, its threads woven with precision. I had to balance the facade of my marriage with Jenna while deepening my connection with Linda. Both alliances served my purpose, but the weight of deception was suffocating. Each conversation with Jenna felt like walking a tightrope. One slip, and everything would unravel. Linda, on the other hand, became a refuge of sorts. We weren't just partners in revenge. We were co-conspirators, sharing whispers of strategy over wine and stolen moments. Her presence dulled the sting of betrayal, even if it added layers to my guilt. One evening, I received a text from Linda. She told me about another trip. This Friday. Same hotel as last time. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. It was the confirmation I needed. Jenna hadn't slowed down, hadn't wavered in her deceit. And now, I had a timeline. Linda followed up with another text. "Are you sure you're ready for this? It'll be messy." "I'm ready," I replied, though the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. The next day, I prepared. I drove to the hotel Jenna and my father frequented, booking a room on the same floor. I brought the recording device and a camera, ensuring I had every angle covered. This wasn't just about confrontation, it was about control. That evening, Linda and I rehearsed how things would play out. She had invited Jenna to her house for coffee the following morning, planning to subtly pry into her upcoming work trip. "Are you sure you can get her to admit something?" I asked, pacing the room. Linda's lips curved into a smirk. "You'd be surprised what she tells me when she thinks I'm on her side. She's always had a habit of oversharing." The idea of Jenna confiding in her mother about my father made my blood boil, but I forced myself to focus. What if she doesn't slip up? I pressed. "She will," Linda said confidently. "If she doesn't, we still have the tracker and the camera. But trust me, she'll say enough to incriminate herself." The next morning, Linda called to confirm that Jenna had taken the bait. "She mentioned the trip," Linda said. "Not in detail, but enough for me to know she's meeting someone. She even joked about how she has to keep the peace at work." I clenched my jaw. The audacity of her lies, the ease with which she spoke them, only fueled my resolve. That Friday, Jenna left for her business trip with the same practiced routine. A kiss on the cheek. A quick, "Don't wait up for me." The suitcase she carried seemed heavier with secrets, and as I watched her car disappear down the street, I felt a surge of determination. I waited a few hours before driving to the hotel. I checked into my room, setting up the camera and positioning the recording device in the hallway. Then, I waited. It wasn't long before I saw them, Jenna and my father, walking hand in hand to the elevator. The sight of them together sent a wave of nausea through me, but I stayed hidden, capturing every moment. Once they were inside their room, I waited another hour before slipping the recording device under their door. I didn't need to hear every word, just enough to cement their betrayal. The next morning, I retrieved the device and reviewed the footage. It was more than enough. Laughter, intimate conversations, and damning admissions. By the time I returned home, I was running on adrenaline. Linda called that evening to check in. "Did you get what you needed?" she asked. "More than enough," I replied. There was a pause before she spoke again. "What's next?" I glanced at the folder containing the evidence, my mind racing with possibilities. "Now we make them pay." Linda's voice was steady, almost cold. "Good. They deserve it." That night, as Jenna returned home and slipped into bed beside me, I stared at the ceiling, planning my next move. She had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down, and I intended to be the one holding the wrecking ball. The next morning, I woke up before Jenna, the weight of what I planned to do pressing down on me like a boulder. The folder containing the evidence sat on the dining table, its contents waiting to shatter the illusion of normalcy Jenna had so carefully crafted. Jenna stirred as I sat at the edge of the bed, running through the confrontation I had rehearsed countless times. Would she deny it? Deflect? Turn the blame on me? Each scenario had played out in my head, but the uncertainty still gnawed at me. When she finally woke up, stretching lazily and flashing me a smile that felt like a dagger to my heart, I spoke. "Jenna, we need to talk." Her smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "What's wrong?" I gestured toward the kitchen. "Let's sit down." She followed me, her steps hesitant. The folder sat between us as we faced each other across the table. I took a deep breath, steadying myself before sliding it toward her. "What's this?" she asked, her tone wary. "Open it," I said simply. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the photos, the printed text messages, the stills from the videos I had taken. Her face went pale, her breath hitching as realization dawned. "Explain this," I said, my voice quiet but firm. She struggled for words, her eyes darting back and forth between the photos and my face. "It's not what it looks like." I laughed bitterly. "Not what it looks like? So what is it then? Enlighten me." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. Her betrayal had drained me of any compassion. "It was a mistake," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "With my father?" I snapped, my composure cracking. "You didn't mean for it to happen? How long, Jenna? How long have you been sneaking around behind my back, lying to me, while laughing with him?" She looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "Answer me," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. "Months," she admitted, her voice breaking. "It started a few months ago." I cut her off, the fury inside me erupting. "You destroyed our marriage for months of this? Do you know what you've done to me? To us?" Tears streamed down her face as she tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "It was a mistake," she repeated. "I love you, I swear. I don't know what I was thinking. I was stupid, selfish." "You're right about one thing," I said coldly. "You were selfish. And stupid if you thought I wouldn't find out." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by her quiet sobs. "I trusted you, Jenna," I said finally, my voice shaking with anger and heartbreak. "And you didn't just betray me. You did it with the one person who should have been off limits. How could you do this to me? To us?" She didn't respond, her head bowed in shame. I stood, pacing the kitchen as I tried to collect my thoughts. "Do you think there's any coming back from this?" I asked, my voice icy. "Because there isn't. You've ruined everything." "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'll do anything to fix this." I stopped and turned to her, my heart hardened. "Fix this?" I echoed. "There's no fixing this, Jenna. You made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." She broke down completely, her sobs racking her body as she buried her face in her hands. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity, but I pushed it aside. This wasn't the time for mercy. "This is just the beginning," I said, my voice low. "You're going to see exactly what it feels like to have your life ripped apart." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her crumbling at the table. In the living room, I grabbed my car keys, needing space to think, to breathe. As I stepped outside, The cold air hit me like a slap. I knew the confrontation wasn't over, but for now, I needed to prepare for what came next. This wasn't just about Jenna anymore. My father had crossed a line, too. And he was next. I spent the day driving aimlessly, my mind racing as I tried to process what had just happened. Confronting Jenna had been cathartic, but it didn't erase the betrayal. The thought of my father, sneaking behind my back, turning our bond into a mockery, made my blood boil. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening, my anger had crystallized into a dangerous calm. The house was quiet, the faint glow of the television visible through the living room window. My father opened the door moments after I knocked, his face lighting up with a smile that made me want to punch him. "Son, what a surprise. Come in." I stepped inside, my fists clenched at my sides. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. He furrowed his brow. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" I ignored his feigned concern, walking past him into the living room. The television played some nature documentary, its soothing narration at odds with the storm brewing inside me. "Turn it off," I said, not looking at him. He hesitated, but the weight in my voice left no room for argument. He grabbed the remote, silencing the TV. "What's this about?" he asked, his tone cautious. I turned to face him, the fury I'd kept bottled up finally bubbling to the surface. "It's about Jenna," I spat. "And you." His face went pale, his eyes widening in shock or guilt. He opened his mouth to respond, but I didn't give him the chance. "How long?" I demanded, my voice trembling with barely restrained rage. "How long have you been sleeping with my wife?" He stepped back, his hands raised defensively. "Now, hold on a second. Don't you dare lie to me." I cut him off, taking a step closer. "I know everything. I've seen the texts, the hotel records. I saw you with her." His shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought he might deny it anyway. But then he sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said quietly. I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, great. That makes it better. You didn't mean to betray your son." "It's complicated," he said, his voice pleading. "It wasn't about hurting you. Jenna and I—" "Stop," I barked, cutting him off again. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You were my father. You were supposed to protect me, not stab me in the back." He flinched at my words, guilt etched across his face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "I never wanted this to happen. It got out of hand." "Out of hand?" I echoed, shaking my head in disbelief. "Do you even hear yourself? You didn't just destroy my marriage. You destroyed us. How am I supposed to look at you and see anything but a traitor?" He took a step closer, his expression desperate. "Please, listen to me. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. We're family." "Family?" I snapped. "Family doesn't do this to each other." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. My father looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," I said finally, my voice cold. "But I can promise you this. You're going to feel the consequences of what you've done." I turned on my heel and walked out the door, ignoring his calls for me to come back. As I drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, I felt a strange sense of relief. Confronting him had been painful, but it had also been necessary. Now, the wheels were in motion. Jenna and my father had betrayed me, but they weren't going to get away with it. Not if I had anything to say about it. The days after confronting my father were surreal. I avoided Jenna at home and ignored my father's attempts to call me. Their apologies felt hollow, their guilt meaningless. It wasn't enough for them to say they were sorry. They needed to feel the weight of their actions. With Linda by my side, we crafted the first step of my revenge. I was tired of playing the victim. Now it was my turn to hold the reins. The plan began with Jenna's work. She prided herself on being the perfect employee, her career a source of pride and validation. It didn't take much digging to find that her company had a strict no-fraternization policy. A tip-off to HR, complete with the evidence I'd gathered, was all it took to start the ball rolling. A week later, Jenna came home pale and shaken. "I'm being investigated at work," she said, her voice trembling. Someone accused me of violating company policy. I shrugged, feigning ignorance. That's awful. I hope it works out for you. Her eyes searched mine, as if looking for a hint that I was behind it, but I kept my mask firmly in place. While Jenna dealt with the fallout at work, I turned my attention to my father. His reputation in the community was everything to him. As a small business owner, his public image was his livelihood. Linda helped me draft a letter, a carefully worded concern, addressed to the local Chamber of Commerce. It outlined his behavior in vague but damning terms, enough to plant seeds of doubt without exposing my involvement. Soon, whispers spread among his colleagues. The rumors, combined with his sudden distraction and stress, led to a decline in his business. For once, he wasn't the confident, untouchable figure I'd grown up resenting. Amid the chaos, Linda and I grew closer. What had started as an alliance of convenience became something deeper. She was a balm to my wounded pride, a reminder that I still had worth. One evening, as we sat together in her living room, she reached for my hand. "You don't have to face this alone," she said softly. "I don't know where I'd be without you," I admitted. Our lips met, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than anger or despair. It wasn't just an affair. It was a rebellion against the life Jenna and my father had tried to cage me in. The next phase of my revenge was bolder. With Linda's help, I compiled the evidence into a single file, a damning collection of texts, photos, and videos. Then, I created an anonymous social media account and posted it. Within hours, the post went viral in our social circles. Friends, family, and colleagues saw the truth laid bare. Jenna's reputation crumbled, and my father became a pariah. Both of them called me, begging me to take the post down, but I ignored them. This was justice, public, undeniable, and humiliating. Jenna's job was the first casualty. She was terminated for violating company policy, her career in shambles. My father, meanwhile, faced boycotts and dwindling business. They had no one to blame but themselves. At home, Jenna tried to mend things. "We can still fix this," she pleaded. "We can start over." I laughed bitterly. "Start over? There's no fixing this. You and my father made sure of that." I handed her the divorce papers I'd prepared weeks ago. "Sign these," I said, "and don't expect mercy in court." The divorce was messy, as I'd expected. Jenna fought for alimony, but the evidence of her affair with my father worked in my favor. The judge sided with me, leaving her with little more than her personal belongings. I cut ties with my father as well. He tried to mend our relationship, offering apologies and excuses, but I refused to hear them. "You're no longer my father," I told him. "You're nothing to me." With Jenna and my father out of my life, I focused on rebuilding. Linda became my anchor, her presence a source of comfort and strength. We moved in together, creating a life that felt real and untainted by betrayal. But I couldn't shake the scars of what had happened. Trust was a fragile thing, and while Linda had earned it, I knew it would take time to heal completely. On the one-year anniversary of the confrontation, I visited my father's shop. It was nearly empty, the shelves sparsely stocked, and the air heavy with defeat. He looked up as I entered, his face lighting with a flicker of hope. "Son," he began, but I held up a hand to silence him. "This is the last time you'll see me," I said. "I just wanted you to know that I've moved on. I've built a life without you or Jenna, and I'm happy." He opened his mouth to respond, but I turned and walked out before he could. As I stepped into the sunlight, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Revenge had been satisfying, but it was letting go that truly set me free. Betrayal had shattered my world, but I had rebuilt it stronger than before. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole.